I loved how Ms. Flowers just now talked about she's seen the things that have happened from the hog industry and how it's really affected North Carolina and the people who have to deal with those issues. And she's decided to change her diet, by taking that, at least taking that small step to help with the problem. So we're going to go into food. We have some wonderful speakers from the Interfaith Food Shuttle, which is a nonprofit here in North Carolina that teaches about sustainable agriculture. It feeds people in North Carolina area who have trouble sometimes getting what they need. Teaches about sustainable catering, a number of things. And they're going to come and share with you all about how we can take steps like Ms. Flowers of eating sustainably. They tell you all the time, oh, eat more fruits and veggies, but a lot of people don't realize that their fruits and veggies are flown from another country or flown from another part of the U.S. to the supermarket where they are, which is putting more carbon into the air and a number of other factors that are, even though you're eating more oranges, you're still making a negative impact upon the upon the earth, basically. And they're going to come and talk to you all about sustainable eating, healthy eating, and how you can do your part for the environment with just making simple choices for your everyday meals. So we're going to have Miss Julie Cox, who's the advocacy manager, and I'm saying this wrong, Ian Corrigan, who's the urban agriculture educational manager, come and share some time with you. Please welcome them and receive all they have to offer.
So I'm Julie Cox, and I'm the advocacy manager at Interfaith Food Shuttle. And so what we did, we were founded in 1989 to get to sort of our origin story, if this is about sort of sharing stories and storytelling about climate change. Two moms, basically, at the parents at a soccer game were hungry, and so they went to get food, and it was before 24-hour breakfast, and they saw breakfast being thrown away. They got in a panic, and so they rescued those sandwiches and took them to Shepherd's Table in Raleigh. And I think there were 4 sandwiches, and they cut it 11 ways and fed 40 people. And it's grown now into an organization that last year we recovered 6 million pounds of food. And what we do, we recover food from grocery stores and the farmers market that is still edible and in date, but it's close to that time, and it may not sell because it doesn't look as good or it's too close. And we take it to, some of it comes to our warehouse, but most of it actually goes to different partner agencies like Catholic Charities or urban ministries, and we set up mobile markets, which are sort of like grocery stores. And people come in and can choose their own food. Self-choice is a really important thing to us. But that's food that would be thrown away and is going out to people who need access to food. And it doesn't end up in the landfills. And some of it that comes back is kind of gross, but we have like a woman who comes in, she's a mushroom farmer, and she'll take the icky strawberries and some of the icky produce and turn it into compost and things like that. We try, actually, we're not just about just simply feeding people. We try to feed people as healthily as we can. And so we get a lot of bread and baked goods like sheet cakes from grocery stores, and we actually give that to hog farmers, speaking of hog farming. And they use it to feed their pigs, but it's not trash. It goes to feed someone else. Our kind of motto is we feed, we teach, we grow. So feeding is, you can't learn if you're hungry. So the first thing you really need to do is feed people. And then we teach, we have gardening and farming programs and community health education programs, so people can learn to shop on a budget and eat healthy on a budget, cook for themselves. All the meals they learn to cook cost under $10 to make. We do grocery store tours where you'll go around a grocery store and learn how to shop the perimeter, essentially, and how to read labels and things like that. So, and how I came to this work, some of it, my parents actually, my dad got really sick, and they kind of lost everything having to pay for health care. So that was sort of my first moment with a personal moment, seeing people experience hardship, having to look for food where it was kind of bountiful before. And then when my children went to school, one day I was making copies and they gave me, numbers of a classroom, and one of the columns was for homeless children. And I was just like, oh my God. And eventually a group of us started a nonprofit to set aside funds for Backpack Buddies, which is weekend food to go home with kids who have been identified as not having enough food or any food in their homes. And so I started working with the food shuttle that way, because our school, and then when my kids went on to middle school, that middle school received Backpack Buddies. And, just I think coming to understand the love of hunger, like sitting across from one of my daughter's friends at lunch one day and seeing her put food into her pockets and up her sleeves to take home because there wasn't enough food. Just kind of trying to put yourself in someone else's shoes, what hunger looks like, how hard it is. Like one of the assistant principals said on a Monday, like there's just chaos in the office, and she said, Mondays are really the hardest because they come back to school, the kids, from whatever's going on in their home, and then a lot of them were really hungry because they haven't had food to eat. So keeping people fed is really important, and recovery is one way we do that, and that also helps the environment. It keeps that food out of the landfills. Some of the limitations and challenges of that, we still have to drive around to pick up all the food, but we're always trying to consolidate our routes, make it more environmentally friendly to drive our trucks around. We've actually worked a lot with the grocery stores, and so we don't end up with a lot of food that we can't really distribute, or we'll take stuff that they compost that can be fed to the pigs or composted. Harris Teeter has actually started composting most of their products, leftover compostable products. So it takes a lot of different people and a lot of different organizations on different levels. And I think one thing that makes it hard to talk about, and you just see this because it's really personal. If you're hungry, you don't have enough food if you're hungry because obviously you don't have money to buy it. So people sometimes are embarrassed to talk about it. But I think, trying to create situations where people are comfortable and ask for help. We have pantries in schools where kids can go, teachers can refer kids, they can just go get food if they're hungry. Creating this access. And what we do is a little different than other food banks. We try to go to the point of need into people's neighborhoods where they live. And like we have a food truck that goes out in the summer and provides evening meals, because summer is really a hard time for children who are food insecure. But also creating the community gardens where people live, in school gardens, teaching kids to grow where food comes from. And Ian can talk more about that.
Thanks, Julie. So I'm Ian Corrigan. I'm the Urban Agriculture Education Manager for the Interfaith Food Shuttle, but we'll just consolidate that to Urban Ag Ed because no one wants to say that many syllables over and over and over again. But so I often joke that I have the best job inside of the food shuttle because I get to feed, teach, and grow all at the same time. That's what brought me to the food shuttle. Is funny because I didn't think about where food came from when I was a kid. I didn't start thinking about it. I guess I was still a kid. I was 10 when my two best friends went vegetarian. And kind of from that point on, my adolescence was shaped with this imperative, ethical need to understand where my food comes from, and to really connect with the choices that I make and how it impacts our environment. That really opened a door for me as a teenager who was really unhappy in an unstable home, because I was able to go out and start working on farms because they could trade me a roof over my head and food for the work that I was able to do. So I got to learn these amazing skills that really, for the first time, had me feeling self-sufficient and gave me a sense of autonomy. And it wasn't until that I went through my AmeriCorps service year with a program called Food Corps. If any of you are interested in AmeriCorps, I highly recommend it, where I was able to really figure out that I had this love of teaching and working with kids and growing and learning together with a community. And that's exactly what brought me to do urban ag education with the food shuttle, because we're all about growing together. Our learning gardens are in downtown areas, right? So they're right on the edge of like what would be like the city center of downtown. Our Camden Street Learning Garden is an acre of edible green space where everyone that's surrounding it is either in public housing or their houses that they've lived in for generations are now being encroached on by, apartment complexes and different buildings going up all around the downtown area. So we have this green acre of space that's just an oasis to folks who live in the community who can come and garden with us and not only grow food exactly that they want to eat, but they can also take advantage of the fact that we have peach trees and fig trees and blueberries and all of these perennial things that are normally really pricey and come from all different kinds of areas in the grocery store. Most of the grocery stores are, there's grocery stores within a couple of miles, but if you don't have a car or if you have a hard time getting around on your own 2 feet, it's not really accessible. And if you have to save your money in order to pay for other things, you're not going to pay for bus fare, so that way you can go to the grocery to buy food that's not going to help you keep your momentum going. So the folks who garden with us are able to feed their families at no cost for themselves, which if you look at Gear Street Learning Garden, it's a quarter of the size of Camden, but it is tiny and mighty. The folks across the street, our neighbors across the street at Sunrise Recovery Center, they come and they garden with us, so they're able to grow food for the patients, the clients who come through and work with them. They find it very therapeutic. They say that it's great to be able to come over and to be able to have the opportunity to grow these things for themselves. And then all of the extra food that we grow at that garden, in the little quarter acre space that we have there, is grown and is donated to pantries that are donated to less than like 10 miles away. So we're able to get this fresh ability of being able to take this food that's grown and harvested not just 10 miles away and get it to folks in the neighborhood in the same day. And this is exactly why we started working with schools, because what is a school if not a community of people, right? You have, especially in elementary schools, if they don't move, from kindergarten to 5th grade, that's 6 years of a kid's life for 2/3 of their day being in a school. And with 1 in 5 kids in North Carolina being exposed to hunger, what better way to have this small, sustainable solution for a food source than being at the school and available for them every day? But it's not just a matter of like, if you build it, the produce will come, because gardens are living, breathing things, right? They require a lot of maintenance, and they will keep growing as long as their needs are being met. But what does a garden need, right? So like, if you put a seed in the ground, does it just grow, right? Or if you plant a tomato, then how do you know when it's ready? Or if you plant a sweet potato, how do you know when it's ready? Has anyone in this room ever seen a sweet potato at like 6 weeks old? Okay, a few hands, so you would know what you're looking at. Most people don't. It's a vine, right? It grows along the ground. It takes 100 days for that vine to be ready to pull out and for you to eat that root. So that's 100 days sitting all summer long, and it has to be watered because it's a tropical plant, so it likes a lot of water, right? And so you have to water it for 100 days all over the summer. It's got to grow under the hot summer ground. But while it's growing, you can eat the vine. So those greens that are coming off of the sweet potato plant, you can eat them. They're super nutritious. So you still have a food source even while it's under the ground and it's growing. But it takes 100 days before you can, take it out and turn it into a pie. But this is kind of a typical kind of line of questioning that I'll get with like any of the kids that I work with. They'll be like, well, what about this? What about this? Well, what does that look like? Well, why do this, right? And so these are things that we have to do together, and this is why all of our programs, all of the opportunities that we have, the school gardens, the learning gardens, is why it's surrounded by education. So it takes a long time to be a gardener and for you to be successful as a gardener, right? So we have this program called Seed to Supper, which is a 5-week class where folks come together and they start a garden while they're with us. They either start it in their home, if they have the space to do that, or they start it at the learning garden in Raleigh. And every week, the participants will come with a story. So they'll come and they'll be like, oh, like my plant's finally germinated, or I found the perfect sunny spot, or, you know, did you see this like hole in my plant? Like, what's going on? What did I do wrong? And they're not just telling us, but they're telling each other. So they're creating this community, this support work of folks who are learning together about something, and they're supporting each other through it. And it's the same thing with kids. You know, kids and adults are not very far off from each other, right? Well, hopefully we retain a lot of that same tenacity as we get older. But the kids in our after-school program called Sprout Scouts, they get to decide what they're going to plant. So they know what they're going to harvest at the end of our 8 weeks together. And they get to decide where it goes and, you know, which things grow together and which things that they want to plant, which things that they don't really want to plant, but we usually make them plant anyways because it's a good experience, we tell them. And they are so excited at the end of those 8 weeks to be able to pull up those radishes or harvest that spinach and make a salad and take it home to share with their families. And they're excited to tell their families about what they did, and they're excited to tell their families to eat a salad, which if you know, were to say that to any other 9-year-old who hasn't put their hands in the dirt, maybe they aren't so excited about it, right? Especially if they're not used to getting that fresh produce at home. And this is the exact same thing that teachers are excited about, because finally there's a fun way to talk about area and perimeter, you know? It's not just sitting in front of a table coloring in these squares and wondering, you know, like counting them and hoping that it clicks for someone. You can take them out to a garden and turn it into a little square foot garden and talk about each one of the square feet and how many carrots you can fit in each one of those square feet, and then it clicks. And so the kids are able to see, this is why I'm supposed to know this. Like, this is something I can actually do with this. And then maybe they'll pay attention in science a little bit more. And they'll understand that there's a way that they can apply these things that they're doing. So we're encouraging kids to go into STEM fields, and we're encouraging them to be like hungry learners, but while still having full stomachs, you know? And so there are growing pains when it comes to like being a gardener. You're not always gonna have tomatoes when you want them. The cucumber seeds might not germinate. You can't keep all the critters from eating your leaves. And sometimes, you know, not everything is pretty. Not everything is as it is in the grocery store. But folks are learning how to eat on a seasonal diet. They're learning what it means to adjust your diet to what's in season, and what it means to be able to take control of what foods you're able to incorporate into your diet. And you know, it takes time and patience to be able to wait for things to be ready. And then it takes time and patience to know that the bees and the worms and the spiders aren't going to hurt you, and that they're your friends in the garden. But those growing pains fade with the empowerment that comes from every season and every harvest. And so if any of that like kind of resonates with you or connects with you, we want you to, just like, you know, you heard from some of your fellow students earlier, you know, to take action, to do something, whether that's, you know, volunteering with an organization like us, because we heavily rely on volunteers. Or it's, you know, signing up for one of these kinds of AmeriCorps programs. We have 2 AmeriCorps service members in Durham, so if it's something that you're considering out of school, please come and talk to me. Or if it's just anything else, your own endeavors that really like spark your interest, we really want you to be able to move forward and to do that. And because there's a reception, and I've heard it like kind of be queued up a couple of times for like you guys to hear about it. But as you go into the reception, we have a bit of like an icebreaker that you can do, you know, because this is kind of like centered around sharing stories, right? And so this little icebreaker, if you're feeling brave, you can find a stranger, someone you've never talked to before. You know, Julia and I both shared some of our stories of how we came to do this. But if you just take 4 minutes when you go into the reception, and for 2 minutes, you talk to the stranger and you tell them your moment, like what brought you into coming in here today. So like, what is it, like what's one story that brought you into being here today from your past? And you talk for 2 minutes, and then the other person will talk for 2 minutes, and both of you will just take turns listening. Because as important it is to be able to use your voice and to speak to what's true about what's happened with you, it's also important to practice using your ears and listening. Does anybody have any questions for us?
And also, I forgot, sorry, one thing before the questions. I was supposed to talk about food deserts. And Actually, so that's a term we're really trying to move away from because it's pretty negative and derogatory. And if you live there, you may not want your neighborhood to be known as a food desert. So right now, there's not like a term that people use, but you just say low access to nutritious food. But so North Carolina is the 10th hungriest state in the country, and that's crazy when you consider what an agrarian state we are. So clearly, this ties into the mobile markets, but there's a distribution problem because if the grocery stores and food farmers market are throwing away food, clearly there are places that aren't getting it. And so in a urban or suburban area, a food desert is or a place with low access to food, nutritious food, is about a mile. But out in the country, it's 10 miles because, things are just more spread out. And then, transportation comes into it. There are all kinds of different things that come into play. And interestingly, I was actually just reading that community gardens aren't considered part of the food network of an area, so they wouldn't be included when you're mapping a food desert. And if you look at the kind of latest map of food deserts, the Southeast is most prominent in having just places that food is not, you can't access it very well. And that's, you might be able to go to like, I grew up in Texas, 7-Elevens or, your corner market because you can't access all the food that you need to get by. You would get, high calorie food, soda, things like that, things you don't need. So like a grocery store that has produce and milk and things that you might need.
Can you go into more about how we waste food and how your organization recovers food, but just how we waste food in different ways we can think about how to, as we're shopping for things or just in everyday life, how we can combat that?
So I can start. Like 40% of the food produced in the U.S. is thrown away, which is just shameful. You think of all the people you could feed. We'd get really deep into ending hunger if we could, in the U.S. anyway, if we could use that. I know in our own household, my husband does the grocery shopping, and he's always after more my daughter or my kids that, why are you throwing this food away? And he's always trying to adjust what he buys. And, they'll be like, well, why don't we have this food in our house? It's like, you didn't eat it last time. So, and I recently went to a composting conference, and I think being able to compost what you don't eat is another way. It doesn't just get into the trash and create the problems like methane and everything like that when it goes into the thing where all the trash goes. What's it called? Sorry, it's Friday afternoon. No, landfill. Thank you. And one of the guys speaking, he has a composting company, and he's from Ireland, and he was talking about how in Ireland you actually, like here we have a trash bin, a recycling bin. Well, in Ireland you also have a compost bin, and essentially none of their landfills have any food in them because it all gets composted. So, and I think at State, I don't know if you guys do here, but State I think has a dorm composting program where you can compost in your dorm room, which I think you'd have to work that out with your roommate. But and I can talk more about produce and things like that.
Yeah, and that's kind of where like conscientious consumerism comes in, right? Like being aware of like how your choices impact the food system. And so, I think the best thing to do is to support a farmer directly. So if you are able to go to a farmer directly and buy produce from them, they will give you whatever they're growing. And so if you're familiar with like CSA programs, it's community supported agriculture. It's like you basically buy a share of the farm for the season, and then they give you a box of food based on that share every week. And so they set up different plans. A lot of places have work share programs, depending on like who you're working with. Some of them, it's like you come for 8 hours, they'll give you a box of food because farmers need a lot of help, especially if they're small scale farmers. But other than that, it's you have to make whatever choice is comfortable for you and what you're able to do, to be able to tell people that you care about, like where this food is coming from. And I think that if you I mean, obviously, I think that if you are able to grow food yourself, then you're better off because you're knowing exactly where it's coming from. But it's a larger, cultural issue of us wanting our food to be pretty and wanting it to look untouched and wanting it to look preserved because that's what we're used to. And so I think that that's a larger uphill battle that I don't have all the answers for, short of like just keep telling them how you feel.
And I think too, like some of the things to do, think about the food shuttle's origin story. It started with 2 women recovering 4 sandwiches and giving them away to the Shepherd's Table, and now we're about a 50-person organization with a $4 million budget, and we recover 6 million pounds of food and distribute all this food, and we have 2 community gardens and a farm and school gardens, and every little bit, every step you take, and also advocating for change. Talk to your lawmakers, make your voice heard. If you feel passionate about something, speak out about it. If something seems unjust to you, I think use your voice. So that's one action you can take.
Yes, ma'am.
So I have a question about eating what's seasonal. So I'm an international student, so it was particularly shocking for me to enter the grocery store and find some fruits all season round. And for the first year, I was very suspicious. Yeah. But then I just gave up trying to figure out what grows seasonally because I don't know. I don't know what the climate looks like. So how do you go about figuring that out, especially as you move through states? Yeah. Or for me, I'm leaving the States when I graduate. So how do you be a better consumer when you're not familiar with what the climate is or what's seasonal food?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I will say, even if it is seasonal, that doesn't mean that it was grown locally, right? And so the biggest thing, it doesn't matter if you're eating seasonal, if you're buying all of your produce from California, right? Because then it's every season there in California, right? No offense if anyone's from California, sorry. But the best thing to do to be able to eat seasonally is to buy locally, because if you're buying locally, then you're eating seasonally. And so it's good to pair them together, because eating seasonally doesn't really matter if it's coming from somewhere else. Yeah.
So I go to markets, farmers markets, and things like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Most big grocery stores are getting really good now about advertising what is local because more people have asked for it. And so if you look for that tag while you're there, then if it's grown locally, then it's probably in season, unless it's grown with external methods. So if you're using extra heat in order to be able to keep it going or anything like that, which if that's the case, then you really should look for things that are marked organic or used or grown with organic methods if possible, because then that's just assuring that those, if they are growing with those methods, that they're taking the most sustainable options to be able to grow with those methods. And going to a farmer's market is going to be the more cost-efficient way to do that, because grocery stores mark up the prices because they're able to do that to the farmers.
Another question: how do you know what's organic isn't just being green labeled so that it's more sustainable? In the grocery store, yeah, they're gonna label that it's organic. But are you asking about the greater process in growing organically? Yeah. So the organic label is really tricky because it's a tax status, and so it's like another organization. So a lot of farmers cannot afford to label their food as organic. So even if they are using organic methods, they can't spend, because you have to pay them in order to label your food organic. And so farmers who are able to do that have the financial means to be able to do that and are operating with that ability, which is why it's another reason to go directly to your farmer to be able to say, do you use organic methods? Because most farmers do, even if they aren't certified, or they will tell you if they do if they are not certified. A lot of farmers do not use conventional because they're able to benefit from that financially for it. But organic methods and being certified organic ensures that the folks who are subscribed to that label are using practices that protect the soil. They're using no synthetic pesticide or herbicides, so they are organic approved pesticides that are bacteria based or plant based or something like that, something that's less
toxic to the surrounding environment, has less of a strong impact on the ecosystem as a whole, and they're minimizing their footprint and using as few non-renewable resources as possible. So that certification really does say this farmer is going to every degree to try and make the most sustainable choice for the planet.
Any other questions?
Can you reference any local composting facilities or resources for us here in Durham?
So there used to be Tilthy Rich, right? Which we know about because we work with Compost Now in Raleigh, and Compost Now is also in Durham. But they built a composting kitchen at our learning garden, and so Compost Now is a great resource to reach out to. Water and Soil, I think, will also have some really great resources in terms of if you reach out to your local cooperative extension, they know more folks who can help set up different personal options and local bigger institution options. Yeah, no problem.
And so Interfaith Food Shuttle, is that Raleigh or Durham?
We're all over the place.
We're based in Raleigh. That's where our main offices are. We actually serve 7 counties, which is Wake, Durham, Orange, Chatham, Johnston, Nash, and Edgecombe. We have our Child Food Hub. We just opened one in Durham on Miami Boulevard, and that's where all our backpack buddies are packed out of. And our school pantries are delivered. The food is delivered from there. So we have, I think, about 12 backpack buddy schools in Durham. We have the Gear Street Garden is in Durham. We have an office in Durham. And then the main office is in Raleigh. But we have about 24, 25 mobile markets throughout these 7 counties. Our backpack buddies are in 87 schools, I believe. We have 27 school pantries throughout all the counties. So, we are kind of everywhere.
How do we get involved with you all?
Excuse me?
How do we get involved or volunteer with you?
So if you just go to foodshuttle.org and look under volunteer, you can access all the different ways. And if that confuses you, you are welcome to call.
Yes, you can email us directly.
And we're Julie at foodshuttle.org and AYN at foodshuttle.org.
Did you have a question? I saw you.
Yeah, in general, I'm a big proponent of urban farming. I try to grow as much food as I can in my front yard. But one of the things I'm concerned about, and I don't know if I should be, is the deposition of air pollutants onto the food or uptake, through the soils. And I've tried to do research on different studies looking at that. I'm concerned about individuals who maybe have greater exposure anyways for issues that Danielle talked about, and then compounding that through eating urban-raised food. And I didn't know if you knew of studies that look at that.
I can't cite any studies off the top of my head of stuff that says one way or the other. I would say that utilize your cooperative extension. Water and Soil will tell you if there's anything that you need to be worried about that's in the soil that's gonna cause a problem.
They'll come out and test your soil.
Yeah, they'll do it for free.
I'm not so worried about myself, but urban gardens
in general.
In general.
It's always good to make sure that there aren't any, because there's definitely toxins that can leach through the soil and that you want to be aware of. That's another thing when thinking about building raised beds. You don't want to use treated lumber with chemicals that are water soluble, because then that's going to go into the soil and then the plant's going to eat it, right? And so you want to be careful about what you're putting together. So there's some concern there. But if you get everything tested, and if Water and Soil kind of clears you and says that the water that you're using is okay and that the soil you're using is okay, and you can kind of judge if the air quality in your area is affecting you enough. I think people who are immunocompromised, there's always a risk there with what they're going to consume. But for your average healthy human, it's, as far as I can tell, it's very safe, as long as you take those precautions.
Let's thank Julie and Ian for sharing their time with us.